All right, so let's begin. Welcome to day 2 of the National Colloquium of Canada's Indigenous Language Policies in the wake of Bill C-91. Okay, we're going to do that again. Welcome to all of you on day 2 of the National Colloquium on Canada's Indigenous Language Policies in the wake of Bill C-91. Last night, we were fortunate to have a long question and answer and presentation by Steve Daniel of the Canadian Heritage Department. And I should point out that on your tables, apart from the program of today, you can find this in this document. Okay, we're still running into
technical problems.
feedback, right?
Yeah.
There's a mic that you need to use from this.
Can we just start having technical difficulties? Please bear with us. Okay, let's try again. So, welcome again to all of you in the room today, and all of you who may be watching on live streaming on the World Wide Web, be it in Nunavut, or Ecuador, or Sweden, I think. This is day 2 of the National Colloquium on Canada's Indigenous Language Policy. And we started day 1 last night with a presentation by the Ministry of Canadian Heritage from Steve Gagnon, in which he walked us through the new federal legislation. And there was a question and answer opportunity last night for people to pose questions and make comments.
We're getting
The echo.
We started day 1 last night. Okay, we're having technical difficulties again. And that will give me a chance to have another break.
Third take.
Okay, so we'll try again. It's true, this is the first time that we have gone through a process of streaming a conference. And we're doing that because we know that there are people who would like to attend today's conference, but are unable to for whatever reason. For example, one person I know is the Nunavut Languages Commissioner, Caroline Apiak, who wished that she could attend and join her good friend AlukiLUK Kotierk at the table this morning, but she was unfortunately unable to make it down from Inuktut on short notice. And there may be also presenters, particularly in the West, in BC and Alberta, who are hopefully going to stand by for this afternoon's participation via Zoom. And they're welcome, of course, to watch the conference through live streaming. So today is a long day, but it's going to be a very exciting day. And as you know from the program, this morning is entirely devoted to the situation of Inuktut in Nunavut. And we are now celebrating 20 years of the existence of Nunavut, which came into force in 1999, now 2019. And I think that the 20 years that have gone by can be studied, can be understood from the point of view of the sorts of issues that are going to be raised this morning. Issues such as language policy, education policy, Inuit identity, Inuit empowerment. All of these questions are not just Inuit questions, but they are questions for every linguistic nation in Canada and beyond. One of the things I've learned is that among the 3 constitutionally designated Indigenous peoples of Canada, the Inuit, the First Nations, and the Métis, there is a great advantage in having opportunities to build bridges between and among those 3 groups. I confess we did try very hard to have somebody from the Métis Nation of Canada to come and speak to us, but that unfortunately was not possible. So in fact, our Indigenous Languages Conference is focused on First Nations and Inuit. And I think there's a lot for First Nations peoples to learn from the experience of the Inuit. In one sense, probably every First Nations linguistic nation would be delighted if at the end of 20 years they were able to have the degree of linguistic vitality that the Inuit of Nunavut already has. And yet, what happens when you achieve that level of vitality? You're going to hear a great deal about how Canada treats successful or relatively successful Indigenous nations on the language front. And it's going to surprise you. This is going to be a very astonishing, surprising morning for those of you who are just coming to Inuit language issues for the first time. Our keynote speaker, it is a great honor for me to have shared at least one opportunity to talk about Bill C-91 with President AlukiLUK KOTIERK of Nunavut Tunngavik Incorporated. I think it was in early April that I found myself sitting beside her in a cold autumn morning, sitting alongside the Minister of Education for the government of Nunavut, and having to begin to explain to very sympathetic, I think, senators about the almost complete irrelevance of Bill C-91 to the Inuit situation of language. And President Kotiork spoke, of course, in Inuktut and convinced, I think, a good number of senators that it was important that the Inuit voice be included in the act. And kudos to the Senate committee for being the only one of the two committees that agreed to put forward a set of Inuit proposals for improving the act. As it turned out, those proposals were rejected by the House of Commons, and the Senate and the Senate committee, the Senate, with very few hours to spare, had to decide whether they would not allow the bill to pass unless the Inuit annex were included. And they decided, no, we will not impede the bill, will not prevent the bill from passing. And so they swallowed the Inuit amendments, and the Inuit amendments were never included in the bill. High drama in Ottawa. So just a few words about AlukiLUK and NTI. NTI represents Nunavut Tunngavik Incorporated, and it is the organization which originally negotiated with the Queen in right of Canada, so with the Canadian government, on the creation of the territory of Nunavut, which came into being 20 years ago in 1999. And NTI and the government of Nunavut, these two entities, are very separate entities. One is a public government that was required by the Mulroney government when they agreed to negotiate with the Inuit. And that public government has, in many respects, lived up to or lived down to what it wasn't. And what it wasn't was a government, let's say an ethnic government or a government of Inuit by Inuit authority. The public government is on one side, and on the other side is NTI. And if I could just express in one sentence what NTI does, NTI is the beating heart of the Inuit intentions around the creation of Nunavut. In other words, since it was the organization that really created Nunavut, its function, among other things, is to ensure that the letter of the law and the intention of the creation of Nunavut is realized by the federal and the territorial governments. In other words, they keep their feet to the fire of the DDM and now the federal government. And although this holding the feet to the fire has always been part of NTI, it's really since AlukiLUK KOTIERK became president in 2016, that NTI has taken on a level of respect, a level of power, and a level of accomplishment that I think NTI prior to 2016 did not have. And so you're going to hear a powerful voice in favor of Indigenous language rights on, after all, a territory that is an existing territory of Canada. And I think the lessons to be learned by hearing about the Nunavut experience are going to reverberate throughout this conference. So I call upon President KOTIERK to come to the podium. Thank you.
ULUK kuya nami tabungan tumasukta mo kuya nami iyang tamaga tuan katimanamon kadlaga kuya simagama inoy okaus nga okaus nga matan na kawi matulog ni Mario ni ngani ariya na ginapa to okaus inoy okaus na kawi matulunga kayo si tiapa ito to tiapa inusang mo aktuan na kailangan ma ikilaw ni tino aktuan na kailangan ma ang marupil sa tawin na tiya masawin ito ng nakutin inway dahil may man chamang nga unang na kuvegin lang para. We assert the right to use Inuktut in all facets of life in Nunavut. Along with English and French, Inuktut should be recognized by the Government of Canada as an official language in Nunavut. We insist, too, that our children have the constitutional right to be educated in Inuktut. These are the words that were shared on April 30th, 1990 in INUIT, when the agreement in principle was signed for the creation of Nunavut by the Tunngavik Federation of Nunavut President Paul Kwasa. I was in the audience because I'm originally from INUIT. I had just turned 15 and the community hall was full of excited people because we had heard about Nunavut and what it was going to be like for us once Nunavut was created. And the excitement in that room was palpable. We knew that once Nunavut was achieved, that it was going to be better for us as Inuit, that our language was going to be used, that the services and programs developed and designed by the government would be based on Inuit culture, on Inuit kauimayatukani, Inuit ways of understanding and being. I wanted to start off with that, to explain what we were hoping for with the creation of Nunavut. And for those of you who haven't had the good fortune to come to our beautiful territory, Nunavut, I thought I would start off by telling you a little bit about Nunavut. First of all, Nunavut in Inuktut means our land. There are 25 communities across our territory, and our territory makes 1/5 of Canada's landmass. As the Nunavut Tunngavik Incorporated president, I represent all Nunavut Inuit. Nunavut Inuit make up 85% of the population in our territory. 75% of Inuit identify Inuktut as their mother tongue. Nunavut, as a separate jurisdiction in Canada, was created through the land claims process. It was through Article 4 of our Nunavut Agreement that it was created. And this is important for us to be aware of because it speaks to all, it's part and parcel of the dream that we're talking about over this weekend. Inuit envisioned that once Nunavut was created, that they would get better services and programs, not only in their language, but in a language that they understood and preferred, but also that they would be receiving the services and programs that better reflected Inuit ways of understanding and being. 2019 is not only the International Year of Indigenous Languages, but it's also the year that marks 20 years since Nunavut was created. Wow, that's pretty exciting. And it sure felt exciting for us as Inuit, because we thought it was going to be better for Inuit. We saw and thought that things were on the right track. The government of Nunavut, when it first began, focused on ensuring that the government model was decentralized. And we know that even today, the majority of decentralized positions are filled by Inuit. The Bathurst mandate, the first mandate of the government of Nunavut, stated, in 2020, Nunavut is a place where Inuktut in all its forms is the working language of the government of Nunavut. That's pretty exciting. We have less than a month before 2020. Each government mandate, consequently, the Bathurst mandate, they've all indicated that they're working towards having Inuktut as the working language of the public service in varying degrees. The government of Nunavut worked hard and in partnership with Inuit organizations to create and pass the Official Languages Act in June 2008 and the Inuit Language Protection Act in September 2008. This recognized and affirmed Inuktut language rights, and it gave Inuit the encouragement and the positive movement that things were being made to bring life to the vision of Nunavut. In Canada, as Ian stated, our language, Inuktut, is considered to be one of the stronger Indigenous languages. Inuktut is alive and well. Yet, we know that it is declining at 1% per year. And at this rate, if we continue to allow it to decline at 1% per year, by 2051, only 4% of us will be speaking Inuktut in our homes. Nunavut is the only jurisdiction in Canada that has a majority language that is not one of the federally recognized languages, French or English. This is an important point worth thinking about and repeating, particularly in the context where Canada is looking at renewing and modernizing the Official Languages Act to mark 50 years since it was enacted in 1969. In Nunavut, we live under a public government. Just like Ontario or Quebec, we pay income tax. We expect to receive public services just like other Canadians. We want to feel safe when we enter the health system, when we enter the justice system, when we enter our schools. Do you think we feel safe? No. What's the difference? The difference is our public majority language is Inuktut. Despite being a public majority language, Inuktut is not the working language of our government, nor the language used to provide essential services. And this really concerns me. Unilingual Inuktut-speaking Canadians are not receiving equitable public essential services similar to those of other Canadians. What happens when a public government does not provide public services in the language of the public? Canadians die. Canadians are hurt. This happens in Nunavut. This is a public safety concern. I look forward to the day in which I see more Inuit walking within Nunavut, in our homelands, with their heads held up high, proud to be Inuit, with dignity and without shame, knowing that they can receive any public service afforded to other Canadians. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about essential services in the areas of health, justice, and education. I look forward to the day in which an Inuktut-speaking Inuk can walk into a health center or the Qikatani General Hospital with the self-assuredness that they will be able to receive their health care services in Inuktut. In February 2017, Bernice Clark, in speaking about the death of her mother, Annie Kutu, stated that Inuktut may have made a difference maker for her mother. She had not received healthcare services in Inuktut. She had been treated for tuberculosis and died in Ottawa with a liver failure. In March 2017, when Gila Kunilusi was asked about her daughter Eileen, who had died at the age of 15, what needs to prevent another death like her daughter's, she responded that the health centers need Inuit staff who speak Inuktut. In October 2015, the Office of the Languages Commissioner of Nunavut released a systemic investigation report into the Piiketani General Hospital's compliance with the Official Languages Act. On the cover of that report, it had a quote from the Commonwealth Fund, which stated, "Being able to speak in one's mother tongue when it concerns health is not asking a favor of healthcare professionals or organizations. On the contrary, it is a basic issue of accessibility, safety, quality, and equality of service." Some of the findings of the systemic investigation included language barriers have a negative impact on quality of care, patient safety, and access to health care services. Patient-provider communication problems may result in misdiagnosis and relevant follow-up treatment. Patient confidentiality rights and informed consent may not be protected. In speaking about interpretation services, one of the contributors to this report stated, "The worst case I saw is that we had to use another patient as interpreters. Obviously, it is a breach of confidentiality, but I also feel that if I use a patient to translate or for another patient, it transgresses medical rights. You are here to get better, and you are being used as staff. Sometimes the patient has to give it a try, but it is the best solution we can come up with." Across Nunavut, in our 25 communities, health services is received through 22 community health centers, regional health centers in Rankin and Lake Cambridge Bay, and the Piiketani General Hospital in Inuktut. I'd like you to take a moment to think about your last trip to the hospital or your visit to the doctor. How important is communication to you? How important is language to understanding and being understood by your doctor or nurse? Think about that doctor's visit. How big a role does accurate information and communication play in what type of health treatment you will receive? Imagine living here in Toronto where the public majority language is English. Now imagine that almost none of the healthcare professionals speak or understand that majority language. How would you feel going to the health system? This is our reality every day. I did not even ask you to imagine what the next step would be when someone has to be sent away for expert health services, away from their home, and from distances as far from, if you were here in Toronto, as far away as Mexico, in a culture and a language that is not your own. NTI's 2007-2008 annual report on the state of Inuit culture and society focused on Nunavut's healthcare system. It states, Inuit are emerging from a period when healthcare priorities and most aspects of healthcare practice and delivery were set by non-Inuit. Inuit wish to improve upon the conventional medical system in Nunavut. It does not engage Inuit, does not operate in Inuit language, does not employ Inuit at a representation level, and does not adequately acknowledge Inuit healers or healing practices. Poorly adapted and chronically underfunded healthcare services and programs based in southern Canada and delivered primarily in English are no longer acceptable. I look forward to the day in which an Inuktut-speaking Inuk can walk into the Nunavut courts or the RCMP detachment with the self-assuredness that they will be treated with dignity and will be able to receive services in Inuktut. This summer, the former Minister of Languages, the current chair of the INUIT, which is the Inuit Language Authority in Nunavut, shared with me a story, a situation in the community of INUIT. In INUIT, a young man was found dead in front of the elders' facility. The RCMP in INUIT went to this person's house to knock on their door. In many of our communities, no one knocks. We know each other, so everyone walks in. So you know by having someone knock on the door that it's a person, probably a Katinak official, a white official. This person, mother, went to the door, opened the door to find 2 RCMP officers, and was not sure what they wanted and could not understand them because she speaks only Inuktut and she was alone in the house. She knew that her adopted son was in Inuit. So she wondered if maybe the RCMP were there wanting clean clothes for him. And she went over to the bedroom to try and show the RCMP officers where this room was. But because she couldn't understand, she didn't know why they were there. So she decided she would walk over to a neighbor's house to see if there was someone who spoke English and Inuktut that could help her. And as they were leaving, a truck was driving by and the RCMP flagged them. She found out that her son was dead. Not even to get into the protocols of what a person, how a person should be treated in terms of hearing life-altering information that with no supports. But I want to focus on the fact that they were going to her house to tell her this life-altering information with no thoughts about how they would communicate with the people that were to receive that information. In Nunavut, there's growing news reports about how there needs to be more Inuktut-speaking RCMP. In April of this year, David Kamanen and his family, in the news we heard, were suing the RCMP after their son's death, David Kamanen. After David Kamanen's son's death in 2017, language has been identified as a factor. In our 2013-2014 annual report on the state of Inuit culture and society, we focus on the justice system. In that report, it clearly describes how the justice system continues to be delivered entirely in English. Since its introduction 100 years ago, the RCMP, the courts, the entire criminal justice system have historically been used to advance Canadian sovereignty over Inuit and the land, laying the groundwork for more intrusive social policies. On August 14, 1917, when Sinixiap and Uluk stood trial in Edmonton, lacking Inuit language translation, The two listened uncomprehendingly to the proceedings. They were eventually found guilty. In a news report in November 2018, the headline read, "Language barrier makes court baffling for many Inuit," a justice worker says. And the justice worker, as a witness to the Viens Commission in Nunavut, Northern Quebec, stated they have no idea what they have signed, in reference to Inuit who signed documents. The good news, I think, amongst all these challenging places that we find ourselves, is that there's also recently a news article about an Inuk law student who's working hard to become a lawyer so that she can provide her services in Inuktut. I look forward to the day in which an Inuktut-speaking Inuk can walk into any school across Nunavut with the self-assuredness that they will be able to receive their formal education in Inuktut. Currently, when a grade 5 Inuk student walks into a school in Nunavut, and I'll just remind you, 85% of our population are Inuit, they must revert to speaking English. At 96%, the vast majority of students in the Nunavut education system are Inuktut speaking, but only 22% of the teachers speak Inuktut. Schooling needs to be delivered in Inuktut in all subject matters, with curriculum that is Inuit-centric. And all messaging within the school needs to positively affirm students' identity, their Inuit identity, in a global community. According to the 2016 census, there are about 80 French-speaking students in Nunavut. They have their own school in Iqaluit with funds from the Canadian government because French is an official language of Canada. The message to Inuit is our language is not as important as French and English speaking individuals in Nunavut, and their needs are higher than our own. The current government of Nunavut has proposed Bill 25, a bill to amend the Education Act and the Inuit Language Protection Act. Nunavut Tunngavik Incorporated, along with the regional Inuit associations, along with the Coalition on Nunavut District Education Authorities, and various community district education authorities, we've all been voicing our concerns, in particular in relation to the language that's being proposed in terms of Inuktut language of instruction. Our view is that Inuktut must be the language of instruction in all grades, in all subject areas, as afforded in the Inuit Language Protection Act. Not just as an Inuit language arts class, which is proposed by proposed in Bill 25. In our view, Inuit culture must form an equal part in the education system. Rather than proactively addressing the underlying issues and investing the resources where they are needed, our government is seeking to diminish existing language rights with this bill, Bill 25. Despite any stated positive intentions, the resulting education system is biased against and discriminates against Inuit children and youth and their families on the basis of their language, and it diminishes their linguistic human rights. The government maintains and promotes linguicism in its policies and practices through structural and ideological processes, and this discrimination against Inuit must stop. There is an urgency to strengthen and revitalize Inuktut, especially given the high proportion of young people in Nunavut. According to Statistics Canada 2016 census data, young Nunavut under 25 years old make up 49.7% of our population. While 89% of Inuit are able to converse in Inuktut, the census cannot hide, or the census data can hide levels of proficiency. To change course, there is an urgent need to make Inuktut the language of instruction from kindergarten to grade 12. As Inuit, we're not simply complaining. We are actually working towards solutions and contributing proactively by suggesting a new Nunavut Education Reform Act that recognizes that Inuit have the fundamental right to control our children's education based on a foundation that encompasses Inuit culture and makes Inuktut the main language of instruction in early childhood education programs and kindergarten through grade 12 in all classes and subjects in a practical and ambitious time frame to ensure the graduation of students proficient in both Inuktut and English or French. I think that's the goal, the aspiration, the bold aspiration that we have, is that when Inuit students graduate from grade 12 within our territory, we would like to see them bilingual in Inuktut and English or French. We would like to see them bicultural, knowing who they are as Inuit, but knowing that they are part of the global community and can contribute not only to Nunavut, but beyond if they so choose. Last week, with Bill 25 in Nunavut, there were public hearings at the Nunavut Legislative Assembly, where many of us went to make appearances and talk about our positions. One of the things I spoke on the Monday, and the public hearings occurred from Monday to Thursday. And one of the things, I monitored all the other organizations and representatives and what they were saying, but one of the most poignant moments for me that kind of shook me was when the interim languages commissioner shared something that she attributed to an Inuit elder who had said, maybe they're just waiting for us to die off. And this was in the context of why does the government of Nunavut not use Inuktut as a language of instruction. On September 8th this year, in what seemed like a promising advance towards Inuktut teacher training, the government of Canada, the government of Nunavut, and Nunavut Tunngavik Incorporated announced that we were going to collaborate towards an agreement that would support, revitalize, and strengthen Inuktut in Nunavut through increased and accelerated Inuktut educator training. We remain committed to continue to work towards establishing community teacher programs in 24 communities with a goal of graduating more Inuktut-speaking teachers. Earlier this year, we committed $5.4 million Inuit dollars to AlukiLUK, a business in Iqaluit that focuses on Inuit language and culture. The intention is that over 3 years, AlukiLUK will provide Inuktut as first language training for adult Inuit who want to increase their proficiency in Inuktut, as well as have a component that focuses on Inuktut for instructors, so that instructors can train in Inuktut. Inuit are resilient, adaptable, and pragmatic. So we cope, we cooperate, and we communicate. We do what the public service has chosen not to do. We keep our language strong at home and alive. We interpret for our relatives in the health system, in the justice system, in the education system. Every day, in hundreds of interactions with the public service, we help our relatives and community members communicate. I do this. My relatives do this. This is our reality as Inuktut-speaking, English-speaking Inuit in Nunavut. In the 1960s, there was a Royal Commission on Bilingualism and Biculturalism held. Following the Commission's report, the federal government acknowledged their responsibility for French language expenditures. In fact, the Prime Minister of the day, Prime Minister Pearson, said Francophones should feel at home in their own country. I do not dispute the sentiment, but I do point out that there is a strong case to be made that Inuit should feel at home in their own territory. Historically, we know that Canada funded buildings and personnel to actively strip Indigenous people of their culture, including their language, through residential schools. Today, Canada must fund buildings and personnel to actively rebuild, strengthen, and protect Indigenous languages, not through symbolic, insufficient measures, but by bold, meaningful investments. Inuit are practical dreamers. I say dreamers because we have bold, audacious aspirations. I say practical because what we dream about is already taken for granted by fellow Canadians. We have never expected to be afforded anything above and beyond the national standards of expectation. When we heard that the federal government was going to embark on the co-development of the Indigenous Languages Act, we were very excited and hopeful and very keen to provide our input. I will be kind and state that we were very disappointed by the end result. We advocated for the following to be included: recognition of Inuktut as an original language of Canada, the original language of Inuit Nunavut, and the first language of the majority of Inuit Nunavut residents. Commitment to the delivery of essential programs and services in Inuktut in Inuit Nunavut. Commitment for resources for Inuktut that are sustainable, effective, and comparable in quality and accessibility to the services offered to other communities. In Nunavut, we expected Inuktut to be recognized as a founding language of the Nunavut territory. We expected that the legislation would afford Inuktut-speaking public majority Nunavut residents the same types of language rights recognized and supported as those enjoyed by the, I think I have the number, according to the 2016 census, 640 Francophones in our territory. Nothing more, nothing less, just equity. I find it interesting that the federal government would be so concerned about the obligations placed on provincial and territorial governments, when in fact, they have historically played a debilitating role in the decline of our languages, and with the lack of bold measures continue to do so. Why is it that we continue to have to fight so vigorously and so tenaciously to carve out an existence as Inuit in a nation that was born on our homelands? Why is it Inuit leaders before me and those after me will have to continue to advocate for such basic human rights to be able to live in dignity? One of the first drafts of the Indigenous Languages Act infuriated me. It made my blood boil. It was so focused on preservation and archiving. I knew that the underlying premise was still the expectation that we were going to die out and have to be preserved for museums and heritage centers. Recognizing English and French as the only official languages fuels the myth and perpetuates the system which places these colonial languages above Indigenous languages as the languages of success. It allows its citizens to die. to face daily challenges in accessing the system. It allows languages to die, and it establishes museums in their memory, because it maintains these colonial languages as languages of power and access. Bill C-91 is government's recent vehicle to claim respect for Indigenous languages, but does so without raising expectations. It is another way in which Canadians can feel good about themselves and pat themselves on their back about how important their relationship is with Indigenous peoples. When we're speaking about the funding that was described last night, one of the things that doesn't sit well with me is the idea that there will be cultural activities funded with these funds, as though language is relegated to cultural activities and folkloric initiatives, when language is the basis of who we are and everything we do, and should be in every aspect of our lives. The Act respecting Indigenous languages establishes a commissioner's office, separate from government, which can issue reports and recommendations. I have concerns that it's separate from government, because it has government off the hook. Governments are not accountable. They can say, well, they've done that. We've provided the money. It's up to them on how they're going to do it. It's no longer we have to do it. There was a comment made last night about reports that would be tabled in the Parliament, and I felt like stopping, because it doesn't matter if a report is tabled in the Parliament. In 1993, INUIT signed an agreement with the Crown, with the Nunavut Agreement. There are 42 articles in that agreement. It takes so much time and effort for our leaders to talk about why they need to be implemented. To this day, in fact, we've resorted to legal action when we've continued to encounter barriers to the implementation of an agreement that we've all agreed to. We know that when there's a statement made about essential services, and that it will be provided based on the capacity available in the federal government. I just want to point out, Article 23 of our Nunavut Agreement obligates governments to achieve a representative workforce. 26 years later, we're still at 50% at best in terms of Inuit employment. So where is the drive going to be to build the capacity to ensure that these essential services are provided? With the signing of our agreement, government got exactly what it wanted immediately. We still find ourselves spending so much time and effort reminding them of their obligations and pushing for the minimum of what we agreed to. Essential services provided by government can and must be provided. In Nunavut, the language Inuktut is the public majority. On Thursday, Nunavut Tunngavik Incorporated released a secret document from 1990. It's a parliamentary cabinet. It's a cabinet document by the Mulroney government, and it's the Cabinet Committee on Human Resources, Income Support, and Health. The first part of the document describes the contents of the articles of the Nunavut Agreement. The second half of the document is a mandate to the negotiators, federal negotiators, negotiating Nunavut. Paragraph 18 states, the final agreement shall not contain any guarantee for the creation of Nunavut territory or provide general linguistic guarantees for use of Inuktut in government and the legal and educational system in the claims area.
That's sick.
So Inuit negotiate in good faith, believing they are trying to make life better for Inuit. I will remind you what I started off with in 1990, just after this mandate document was provided and the direction was provided to the federal negotiators. The Inuit leader representing Nunavut Inuit stated, "We insist too that our children have the constitutional right to be educated in Inuktut," without knowing that it was already a no-go based on what the federal government had decided.
Shame. Shame on a come.
2019 marks 26 years since the Nunavut Agreement was signed and achieved the creation of Nunavut. 2019 marks 20 years since the existence of Nunavut. It is the International Year of Indigenous Languages. It also marks 50 years since the adoption of Canada's Official Languages Act. We have an opportunity to imagine and dream bold, audacious dreams. My bold, audacious dream for Inuit includes bringing back dignity by aligning our systems with the people we serve, not vice versa. The federal government, through the modernization of the Official Languages Act, must capture the current modern jurisdictional map of Canada and recognize that Inuktut is the mother tongue and the language most used by the public majority in Nunavut. This is crucial if the act is to remain relevant and appropriate. Inuit are persistent. Inuit are patient. And I know that Inuit will continue to strongly advocate and stay focused on achieving that. We will continue to think of different ways, whatever tools, including legislative tools, in which to express why it makes sense to support Inuktut so that it continues to thrive. It makes public sense. It makes public safety sense. It makes human rights sense. Thank you for your time.
Well, you heard it, and you can't unhear it. And I think our collective understanding of the perfidy and shame of the Canadian government
And the crown.
and the honor of the crown, the dishonor of the crown in this relationship cannot be forgotten. And thank you, Brianna, to Aluki for this, again, most powerful speech that is relevant, yes, to Inuit from Nunavut, yes, to Inuit Nunavut, but to every indigenous language interested person who is dreaming bold and audacious dreams about your languages. There is such a lesson to be learned from this experience. Let's open to a question and answer moderated period. Yes, and use the microphone if you can. Identify yourself and use the microphone.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Hartog. I'm a linguist and do a lot of work on doctor-patient communication. So I was very interested in hearing what happens up in your report. And I've been doing work on access to healthcare by immigrants and refugees in Toronto, and learned of all the fantastic systems that are, and Canada prides itself on the interpreting services that there are. That everybody has the right to have their concerns interpreted, and if there isn't an interpreter there, there's a 24-hour, 27 days a week service that can be accessed by telephone. Why is that not available for Inuktitut? That is scandalous. Why was that never established?
So with our health system, there are interpreters, but they're not 24/7. You commented here in Toronto, they're available 24/7. They're not available 24/7 in our communities, and I think there's been an apathy, like, to ensure that they're always full. There's vacancies, and I think people get apathetic in terms of, oh well, I'll be able to ask so and so, or I'll be able to get people off the street to interpret. And I think, I use this as an example when I spoke at the Indigenous Health Conference, where as an Inuk, we often feel obligated because we're brought up, we're conditioned to be nice people and helpful people. And that's the way our communities are, that when you see that there's an issue that needs to be addressed, you help. And so the idea that, for the example I used was when I go to the airport, I remember one of the people working at the counter called me over because there was an Inuktitut speaking person that couldn't speak English, and they called me over even though I don't know who they are or what they're doing, and they called me over, can you interpret for me? And the split second thought of, can I even say no? Was, of course I can't say no, because first of all, they think I was a horrible person and snotty, like a person that's not nice. But also the person who needs the help would think that about me. And so then it becomes a burden on me to have to fill in a space that should be filled by the public service. Like, it's not my job to help check in people into random airline companies, and if you're going to provide a service to the public, you should have those frontline workers, and that should be the standard. And unfortunately, in far too many cases, it isn't. The other thing is that there needs to be, in my view, reverence to the big job that interpreters play. And I think sometimes there isn't that reverence. And so even as a society where we have so much dependency on people who are bilingual in English, we need to have that culture, and people who come in need to express that as well. And I think there also needs to be an interpreters association where people are able to maintain the standards and get regular updates on training. Because I know, and pay, I think that's, when I say reverence, it also attributes to the salary case. I think it's much lower in many cases for interpreters who speak Inuktitut. And I think the Francophones have been able to advocate for that over years. And I think there's much more reverence for French-speaking interpreters.
All right. Another comment or question? Yes, sir.
Flourish, Ganagoga. a little while ago, gets from the Bear Clan, from Oneida. My colonialist name is Max Harlan. I'm just getting so emotional because I'm the father of 5 deaf children. And I have 9 grandchildren that are hearing impaired and deaf as well. And what you were saying is what we face throughout this educational process with our children. Who hires people that don't know sign language and they become teachers? In our efforts to understand each other, our communication has to be 100% given, 100% received, and 100% given back to us. That's the only way that you're going to truly understand what that person is giving you and what you in turn are giving that person back. So we found in our situations that in the US and in Canada, in Ontario, where those situations weren't being met at all. Oneida is recognized as a major force in the iron workers field. Now, who would hire somebody that didn't know how to do iron work and put iron up? It's just common sense, but they chose to be stupid about it, ignorant, in fact, to the point where they're not serving anyone but themselves. And yet the faculties, the education system, all gives them their backing. Oh, they're going to learn. They're going to learn. Promises, promises, promises again. So it affected me deeply to what you were saying, to realize that, because Marshall, my wife, is deaf. And there's been so many times that I've been called upon to be her interpreter. And I'm more than that. I'm her husband. And sometimes I'm in situations where I'm not comfortable in doing that. And I've come to the point to say now, no, I'm not going to. This is our personal interpreter here, Debbie. And we get her to do all of that now. She said, no, that's not my job. I'm here to listen, I'm here to absorb. And I can't do that if I'm having to give back to someone else, and it's too much. It's too much for me. And it was just the people that are in charge don't give a damn about us. They don't. The water situations for 50 communities that are on boil water advisories, mine was just recently, and going back to say that should have been posted 6 years ago. So, and the lady that you spoke of earlier, that they're just waiting for us to die, is exactly what they want. You know, Uncle.
On Thursday, actually, I would want to share this. On Thursday, I wrote, I'm the oldest of 7 children. So I wrote to one of my sisters and I said, and the reason Thursday is significant is because I was watching the standing committee appearances, and it was the last day in which people were talking about Bill 25, the amendment to the Education Act and the Inuit Language Protection Act. And it was the Minister of Education, along with government officials, who spoke that morning. And I wrote to one of my sisters and I said, I feel so demoralized. I just need to cry. I feel like there's no more hope. And her comment to me kind of rattled me because she said, oh no, we're screwed because you're the only person that's always so hopeful. And if you're not hopeful, what are we going to do? Something like that, right? And it shook me to realize, no, I mean, there are always barriers and challenges and hardships that we face, but we have to remain focused and stand fast to how we're going to achieve it. And sometimes we have to think about who is the person we're communicating to and what is it that they're going to understand, and think of different strategies to be able to communicate in a way that they'll understand. On that Thursday morning, one of the government of Nunavut lawyers, in speaking about Section 35 of the Constitution, and I'm just going to quote it, stated, "It's really only those rights that existed before the Europeans showed up that are protected by, other than the treaty rights that are protected by Section 35. So while we can't stop Inuit from talking in Inuktut, or speaking and teaching Inuktut to their children, or to other people, or to develop the language and, create new vocabulary, etc., formal education and government services in the modern sense did not exist prior to European arrival in Nunavut. So those rights just simply are not protected by Section 35 of the Constitution."
You should be castrated.
It's one way.
That's right.
And so hearing your experience, I think, reminds me that all of us are faced with hardship and barriers, and we have to figure out how we're going to overcome it. And sometimes we need the help of others. One thing I sometimes jokingly say is, it doesn't matter how many times an Inuk says it, but if a white man says it, it will be heard. And so sometimes you have to say, okay, strategically, can I get you to say something for me, right? I mean, and I'm just being really blunt about that. But that seems to be the experience that we often face. And so you start thinking about how are we going to get the message out so that it's taken as important and believed as important, and that there's no ulterior motives similar to what's expressed in the cabinet document in 1992.
It's certainly true that truth spoken publicly is doubly true. And one of the reasons for this colloquium is to speak truth, like Max Ireland did, like you did. And to do it among friends and allies who are unified in listening and acting. And that is what we've been offered in a place called the Colloquium. And we're delighted with the responsibility that you have conferred to us, Max and Aluki. Because the truths that you have spoken cannot be put back in a bottle and burned. They are streamed live internationally. They will be on our website. And we were challenged yesterday by Steve Daniel to come up with a declaration, an endorsement at the end of this colloquium, like we did with the last colloquium, which had a certain impact. And we'll do it again. And the Inuit voice is not just the Inuit voice, it's the voice of all of us. And you can have our word to that. We still have some minutes of...
I have something else to say.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just thinking about how I said Inuit are practical dreamers. And I think it's important to have aspirations. And I think the first mandate document where it said that in 2020 Inuktut will be the language of work is a good aspiration to have. But the practicalities are really important as well. You can't have an aspiration without the practical work and resources to achieve that. And I think that's where I would say the territory has failed up to this point in terms of Inuktut as language of instruction. I know in 2006 there was a collective strategy to increase the number of Inuktut speaking teachers by 302 individuals. And if that strategy had been resourced, we would be in a much different place than we are currently. We're now currently in a place where the legislation had indicated that Inuktut language of instruction would be in force from grades 4 to 9, if I recall correctly, July 2019. But the government made amendments to that bill because they're not in a position to be able to have Inuktut as a language of instruction because there are not enough Inuktut speaking teachers. And yet, it's a very passive approach, in my view, the approach that they take, instead of being proactive and saying, we know how many people live in this community and we know how many teachers we need. Let's just call people up. And I think one of the things we could do better in Nunavut is use a small population as a strength rather than as a challenge. Often people talk about it as a challenge, but I think the fact that we know so many of our people in our communities would help us in terms of addressing some of the challenges we have and encouraging people to take training when we have such a high unemployment rate. And often what people need is that encouraging nudge. I've used it throughout my life. People have encouraged me and said, you can do this, you know? And I think we need to do more of that to get to a point where we are taking up more of the spaces in our public service.
Absolutely. Yes, it is.
And I have a comment over here.
So yes.
Well, tayo sa ipaskas. Yeah, yung benefit ko yun, what is for it, and how it was that's it's in how near and this is scanning it's no man. This is. I just want to thank you very much for empowering me. Because we've been on our road at a Schweg at my reserve towards what you're trying to do as well. And you have so many more advantages than we did at Schweg. We have a population there of 25,000 colonial people. We've been colonized. Yet only 500 of us speak the language, if that. We've been so colonized. So it was really a struggle for us to look at even immersion education. You don't even have to do that there because your school, all your people speak. But that was our struggle in the 80s. And we were so colonized that even our own people, our own critics in our community of 25,000 said, you're going to teach them nothing but witchcraft there at Gawani. That's what's really hurt us, those of us who wanted to keep our language. So I would just encourage you to go on and on and on, because to me, this is nothing short of linguistic apartheid in Nunavut. I helped coin a phrase, linguicide, a while back. And that's what happened to our languages at Schweg. The English language has murdered our languages at 6 Nations. And I just want to encourage you to keep on going because you are our hope. My people will see what you did in hearing today as the marketing starting point. I think it's going to encourage me to become more audacious as well, because I have confidence. The next level is to be audacious. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's what I'm going to use at my university to make some changes so that it can decolonize. And that's why I'm brought there as a vice provost. So I really thank you for your words of encouragement. In our language, that I really respect you. for encouraging me. So yeah, thank you very much.
Please to hear that you want to be more audacious. That's one of the something that I keep saying to Inuit, particularly when I speak to young Inuit. I talk about how we need to be hopeful and have big audacious dreams, and it doesn't matter if people think we're crazy, but we need to have those big audacious dreams and we need to strive for them. And I remind people that it was the Nunavut agreement that was signed 26 years ago was started off by young 19-year-olds, 24-year-old Inuit who could speak both English and Inuktut and knew that things were changing in our homelands and worked hard to learn the government systems to be able to use that land claims process to achieve what we've been able to achieve. And so age is not a factor, and we need to have big audacious dreams, and once we've achieved something, we have to get another big audacious dream.
I think we have time for a couple of interventions.
Sorry for the interpreter. I'm an Indigenous woman, an Indigenous deaf woman, and I have been colonized. So as an Indigenous deaf woman, I have worked in my community to support and encourage the revitalization of Oneida Sign Language. Sign languages for Indigenous people. So I'm wondering in Nunavut if you have a community there that uses sign language to communicate, and if you have any statistics surrounding how many deaf children you have and who may be language speakers.
Thank you for the question. We do have a society for deaf Inuit in Nunavut because we have our own Inuit sign language. I would be happy to provide you with that.
That's fantastic. There's sign language for deaf people and hearing people within your community, so that they're able to.
I would be very happy to provide contact information so that the Oneida Sign Language can contact the Nunavut Inuit Sign Language.
That would be wonderful.
In terms of statistics, I don't have that information, and I suspect that the data that we have for Nunavut might not encompass all the even hearing impaired population. And I say this because I know Inuit have a tendency, there's a an affinity to an ear issue. And I know that in our schools, recently one of the Arctic Inspiration Prize was provided to a grassroots organization that was going to provide microphones in the classrooms with the hopes that it would have a positive impact on the success of students in our schools. Because one of the reasons that students don't do so well is because they have a hearing issue, but they don't have the supports to be able to address that. And then if they're getting behind in their schoolwork, then they drop out. One of the things that we face in Nunavut is a low graduation rate from high school. One of the things we've been saying from Nunavut Tunngavik Incorporated is that it's not a reflection of the graduation rate, it's the reflection of the push-out rate. The system is pushing students out for various reasons, and we believe that hearing impaired numbers have an impact on that as well as the fact that it's not in the Inuit language, as well as the fact that the curriculum is not based on Inuit culture. So there's a number of factors, but certainly hearing impaired is one of them.
just really clear. One of the goals that I have been, one of my audacious dreams has been that that there will be a universal respect throughout educational systems, post-secondary included. That our languages are recognized in post-secondary institutions. As been mentioned, the respect that is given to the official languages of Canada, French and English, and not given to other languages, and it really specifically sign languages, and it really should be an equal relationship, as you mentioned. It should be a mutual respect that is shared and given. Our relationship with the Canadian government in regards to language has really impacted our self-esteem and our ability to thrive, and we really want to move forward, and language is vital for this. And it's not just vital for us as adults, it's crucial for our children. Thank you.
We've got one more question here.
Can you do it after Joanne?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay. I think Joanne Cochran, you want to step up.
Aluki, thank you for the ferocity in your and passion in your speech. It was very, very moving. On April 1st, 1999, I was the principal of the Center Hayak, and I was in the rink. I was in the gymnasium in Inuit, and people were crying because the dream. People thought the dream would come true. And I guess I would just I later moved to Montana territory, but I guess what I think happened was that I think the report last week, the leak document showed that it was not an even playing field, that people thought it was, and there was clearly a whole other agenda of power in place. But I think two things that I would have to say that have baffled me in my continuing work watching what's happening in Nunavut is the absolute insistence of a colonial mindset that failed to imagine that community people could populate community schools, and the clamor to continue to hire and bring people coming up from the south. The attrition rate is incredible. I think the turnover is about 35% each year of moving people in, moving people out. And by doing that, the absolute failure of picking up what is a highly successful community TEP model, which has been used in many, many jurisdictions and was used in Nunavut prior to the land claim agreement, which was a colonial attitude that somehow felt that capacity could not be built in the territory. We absolutely know that is the case. There are future teachers, leaders, educators sitting in those communities. So I feel that model was dropped, and I guess correspondingly, the Department of Education, while it was achieved to have some representation of the Inuit throughout the system at the top levels of the education system, the Department of Education remained essentially a Kalunak structure and organization, and without being able to push forward an Inuit agenda. There are Kalunak who could have been allies, and that was simply the case. So I think all of the lifting has been left to NTI, and thank God for NTI and your leadership and all of the people behind you that have really turned this into rights-based, human rights-based, linguistic rights. And I hope that what happened in the document last week will be made very public, and if nothing else, shame will bring us back to the table to try and level that playing field. So thank you for this presentation and the work that you and your organization have done in the absence of anybody else taking up those issues. Very, very important.
Thank you, and I'm very pleased to meet you. I think I have a copy of your book. It baffles me as well. I mean, I think the dream of Nunavut was felt by so many, and I think the hope is starting to wane, and people are wondering what is happening. We still have many Inuit in the legislature, which makes it even more confusing to know that the public government system continues down the colonial path, and yet individuals can say, but I'm an Inuit. But I always try and remind people it doesn't matter if you're Inuk, if you're part of that system and you're still perpetuating that system. What we need to do is imagine a different way of doing things and recognizing that Inuit ways of doing things are just as valid and maybe even more powerful and useful in the context that where the public majority are Inuit. Right now, it's very disheartening to see Inuit in our communities that have so much potential, but who live, and you can see the way people walk, even that there's a bit of societal depression. Like I don't know if that's the thing, but I think that you start feeling displaced in your own homeland and you have nowhere to go and who's going to help fix things. And you trust and you try and trust that the government has your best interest at heart. But when you see documents such as this, that shakes your trust. And you say, well, if I can't trust that the government has my best interest, whose best interest do they have? And I think it's often from an Inuit perspective, from as an Inuit speaking about this, I think it's often a mainstream best interest that's at hand. And so it's part of that colonial machinery. I know that in June, each quarter, the government of Nunavut releases a report called Towards the Representative Workforce, where they provide information about how many Inuit are employed in various job categories. And this is part of the obligations outlined in Article 23 of the Nunavut Agreement to achieve a representative workforce. But through that report, in June 2016, it identified that there are 993 Inuit substitute teachers. And so one of the things that we continue to say at NTI is when there are so many Inuit substitute teachers that presumably have received the criminal records checks to be able to be in the schools, that have some interest to be in the schools because they're being substitute teachers. And they're maybe the reason they're not full-time teachers is because they don't have the credentials, which I think have they've continued to balloon, I think, like in terms of what credentials are required. And so one of the things we've been saying is start with those substitute teachers that are currently on your payroll that are Inuit and say, are you interested in being a teacher? We want to support you. Get the training that you require to become a full-fledged teacher. And I think that's a starting point. And unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, there seems to be a very passive approach rather than that proactive solutions-focused approach that could so easily be achieved in our territory where so many of us know each other.
I could just add, I think that governmentality is a colonizing force in and of itself. So I think the very structure of a government makes it so that it creates barriers. And one little story, an Inuit principal, because when I was there, my supervisor of my affairs was Inuit, and my colleagues there on the principal's table were Inuit, and the people in the building were Inuit. But she said in the old days, if you said, I'd like to take the children out on the land because the land teaches in the colonial system for sure, pre-Nunavut, it would have been, well, I don't want that, that's not the time, you're not doing math and literacy. The answer would have been no. But then after Nunavut, the answer was yes, that's really important to do because that's the land is the teacher. But you'll have to make sure you have Form 613 and 213 and the other aspect. So the effect was people didn't go on the land. So the very system of a government and a bureaucracy can get in the way of people really, it hides the dream a little bit. So anyway, I think you have done amazing work getting very unequal, very unequal. There are people who are playing fair, and thank you very much.
Maybe we have one more intervention from Ines, and then I'll break.
I won't be emotional this time. I just wanted to know, I know the word shame and guilt I use as well as part of my strategy when I talk at the university level. so I can become audacious. But a lot of our people don't have those competencies. I call them competencies. But at Six Nations, that was the same thing. University could never have an immersion school system because they're pro-English. But what happened was the parents wanted immersion, wanted language for their. So is there any movement in your area about the parents just keeping their students away from their children away from going to school until something is done? That happened in Quebec as well, with at Shenandoah, near Montreal, where my brothers and sisters from Kahnawake, Mohawks, when the bill, that big French language bill in Quebec became law, that everybody had to study language French, they withdrew all of their children and walked, physically walked, and it made sound bites on the news that night across the country that they walked out of those schools back to their community of Kahnawake. We had to do the same thing here at Six Nations. We had to shame the government. We hired, as I said last night, we hired 2 teachers. No guarantee of salaries, but they were willing to teach because they believed in the importance of language. Is there any kind of conversation happening in your community about that, or in your country process?
Not necessarily in the school, but I want to share an example of how parents got together to create an Inuktut daycare. So in our territory, there's in Keynote, we now have a Inuktut only daycare, and there's a sign saying when you come in here, this is Inuktut space. And parents were the drivers in that. They created that, and they had started noticing that children were now speaking more English, and so they put it upon themselves and volunteered and created the society, and then got a building and now have a daycare. Yeah.
So it's like, I guess the word that they use is being simply disobedient. I guess that's what we have to learn how to use. Much of it's language. Yeah.
Well, I think we all want to express our gratitude to AlukiLUK for giving us a wonderful introduction to how a fight against colonialism is happening in Nunavut.